What's up, guys? My name is Robert Donaldson, and it's been a pretty hectic few days for the Iowa football program with guys transferring out of the program. But today we're going to talk about a guy who's actually transferring into the program, and that is grad transfer defensive lineman Jack Heflin, who is coming to the Hawks from Northern Illinois. For a little background, Heflin played high school ball at Prophetstown High School in Prophetstown, Illinois, and when he was coming out of high school in 2016, Heflin was actually only listed at 6'3", 245 pounds, and he was a two-star recruit, and he would eventually go on to take a preferred walk-on spot at Northern Illinois under then head coach Rod Carey. And since then, Heflin has added about 70 to 75 pounds in weight, and he's coming into Iowa being listed at 6'3", 319 pounds. So, obviously, while at NIU, Heflin experienced quite the body transformation, and another thing that's worth noting is that growing up, Heflin is actually on record of saying that he was a big Hawkeye fan, and he's always had a dream of playing inside Kinnick. So, performance on the field aside, Heflin's journey and story already is pretty amazing, and what makes it even better is that he's actually a really good player, and he will, without question, be making an impact this fall on Iowa's defensive line. The first thing to make note of with Heflin is that coming in listed at weighing nearly 320 pounds, Heflin will not really affect Davion Nixon's snaps next year, because although Heflin did line up in a number of different spots at Northern Illinois, he does lack that really great get-off or that explosion that you really want to see from guys who are going to be playing a bulk of their snaps on the edge or even at 3 technique, and that's going to force him to get lined up primarily in that nose tackle spot or that 2 technique spot with some, I imagine some, limited exposure at 3 technique for Iowa. And following the graduations of Cedric Lattimore and Brady Reef from last season, that role or that spot is tentatively being held by senior Austin Schulte and sophomore Noah Shannon. With that said, as I mentioned earlier, coming in at 320 pounds, Heflin's body type is that of a true traditional nose tackle, which Iowa just hasn't had up front since Jaleel Johnson back in 2016. And although last season Iowa's rush defense ranked 14th nationally, they did at times struggle against the run, and when they did, it ultimately came down to a lack of penetration up front, and it also came down to a lack of ability to force and also occupy double teams on the inside. I'm sure many of you have heard the phrase keeping linebackers clean before. In fact, Kirk and Brian mention it quite a bit in press conferences, and all that means is that up front on the defensive line, you have guys who are capable of eating up a lot of space and forcing those aforementioned double teams, which in turn slows down or even prevents offensive tackles, guards, centers, and also sometimes tight ends from climbing or working to that second level to block those linebackers without hesitation. And assuming that the linebackers are reading their keys correctly and are moving with limited wasted motion, they'll be able to sharply attack those running lanes without getting contacted by an offensive lineman 3 or 4 yards downfield, who at times might have upwards around 70 to 80 pounds on that linebacker. And that's where Heflin is really an intriguing addition, because although he won't necessarily be as active or as laterally quick as Cedric Lattimore or Brady Reef from last season, Heflin is bringing something completely different to the table. Take this play from last year against Nebraska, for example, with Heflin lined up face up with the right guard in that 2 technique spot. You're going to see that right guard absolutely explode off the ball, and he's on top of Heflin before he even knows it. And once that happens, Heflin is in a pretty compromised spot. He's on his heels. He's in a position where a normal player isn't generating a whole lot of power, but despite all that, Heflin digs in. He's going to show an impressive anchor, and essentially he's going into defensive mode for a split second. But after that, Heflin knows the ball is coming his way, actually, because the right tackle actually chips him a little bit on the outside shoulder, and he's aware enough as a player, and you really notice that a lot when you watch him, that once that happens, he's just going to work and progress off of that anchor and essentially muscle the right guard or manhandle that right guard completely off him and shed the block and put himself in position to make the play. And when he makes contact with the running back, he even forces the fumble, which his team ends up recovering. And this was when Nebraska was deep inside NIU's red zone. When you watch Heflin play, he's a wide block of brute muscle who is rarely going to get blown off his spot. And if teams are planning to run to his side of the line of scrimmage, opposing offensive lines are going to have to find a way to account for him and waste those additional steps to make sure at the very least they're chipping him off the ball. And if that's accompanied by clean linebacker play, like I was saying earlier, that's going to play a big factor in shutting down the run for Iowa's defense. Earlier, I mentioned how Heflin might not necessarily be the most explosive disruptor inside, but for his size, he's definitely quick, and it can make up for a tough block up front if the offensive line isn't quite in sync, especially on zone run plays. And right here, you're going to see number 71 chip Heflin off the backside 3-tech spot, which in turn leaves 77 to try and execute a pretty widely spaced reach block, and it just doesn't even stand a sliver of a chance. And although he's not able to get a clean shot on the back here, his disruption completely blows up the play and ends up limiting the yardage gained. Although Heflin isn't the lengthiest defensive lineman you'll ever find, a la Carl Davis or AJ Epinesa, for example, he does do a really good job at utilizing the length that he does have. And it also shows up really well in his hand usage, in his pull and rip moves and swim moves. And you'll also never really see him throwing a shoulder check into an offensive lineman's chest, which I really appreciated just as a football fan, because you'll see that a lot of times from guys who lack that length and can't create with their hands. And Iowa adding a guy who has so much experience at the Division I level and has really performed well, has stood out as an all-MAC kind of player. You know, all in all, Heflin is a very solid addition, and his story makes him a hard guy to root against. And this fall, Heflin will certainly be a welcomed addition to Iowa's front. And out of the gate, I think he should be competing for starting reps at the 1-tech spot and the nose tackle spot, at the very least, alongside senior Austin Schulte and sophomore Noah Shannon. And with that said, y'all, I just want to thank you all for checking out today's video. And you guys have been absolutely killing it with the support. And if you have any questions, comments, or even ideas for future videos, feel free to comment wherever you're seeing this, or you can tweet me at RobDFB. And obviously, any shares on social media would also be appreciated. I always love interacting with all of you, and I see all the places that these videos are getting posted. So if you leave a comment, I'll definitely be able to see it. And with that said, I will see you all in a future video. Take it easy.